This is a meeting of the Water Quality Management Committee, and we're calling it to order. The first item on the agenda is a discussion and a vote on a recommendation to the Select Board for the petitioner's article for a urine diversion pilot. What we have up on the screen,
Is there no public comment?
we don't run public comment. Nope, we do not have public comment inside our agenda. Not in all the years I've been on it, so. Anyways, I took the liberty of drafting a proposed letter of recommendation to the selectmen. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, but you're taking up petitioner articles Monday night? I believe so. So therefore, we need to make a recommendation to get into their board package for tomorrow. So this is where we're at. I think we've all seen and heard quite a bit about urine diversion at this point. We know that the petitioner's article is not a standalone article in the sense that the town's wastewater department had drafted a very similar article, and a decision was made that we would not have two articles for the same thing, and town's article was withdrawn. That being, and I proposed this language, and Kristen's prepared to edit it on any sort of tweaks or comments that this board would like to make to the recommendation. Move that the Water Quality Management Committee recommends that the Select Board support Article 22, a citizen's petition for a provisional pilot project consistent with any recommendations by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP, for a urine diversion project with the purpose of gathering sufficient data from a minimum of 50 homes over, I think we need to add a minimum 3-year period, with the express purpose of obtaining DEP approval of urine diversion as an approved innovative alternative nitrogen-reducing technology that can be utilized within the designated nitrogen-sensitive zones designated by the DEP as part of the town's 14 watershed plans that will be developed concurrently during the 3-year, or you could just say during the pilot period for urine diversion. So,
I'll second that.
well, I'm not sure that I can actually move it. I think somebody else might have to move it since I'm the chair, okay?
Did you want to make the edit?
Somebody needs to move this, but in the meantime, we can edit this.
Okay, well, I guess I'll be the primary mover and someone else can be the secondary.
I'll second it.
Okay,
You have discussion.
yeah, I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start to my
On
file.
edits? I think I had the same comment on it, that the first designated, I don't think is necessary. I think only the second one is
Yep.
needed.
Okay,
Steal this for a second.
okay.
Otherwise, it sounds good.
English is my second language, engineering is my first.
Does it need to say watershed permit plans, or is watershed plans sufficient?
I think we're creating watershed plans.
We're creating the plans to apply for a permit.
Then we apply for the permit.
Perfect. Sounds good to me then.
Tom?
No, I like it with changes.
How's that?
Good.
I want, because the article mentions $1.9 million, and that's not mentioned in this, and there are a number of details, I wonder if you could give me about 3 to 5 minutes just to show 4 PowerPoint slides of some of the details of the project.
I'll circle back to you after I get everybody's comment on the actual motion, okay?
Okay. But before we vote on it.
Yep.
I like it that it's generic, non-specific, details to be determined, I think is a key part of this whole project, that there are a lot of issues with the proposal we have that have been studied and discussed by many, many people. To move this forward and to try to garner townwide support and funding for this at town meeting, I think is important to keep the momentum going. And keeping it simple and generic as this motion is, I think, an excellent way to proceed down that road.
Ken?
Yeah, I mean, my concern, I think and I think Steve's going to address some of that, but was, we don't know what to do with the urine that's collected. And we're proposing the petitioner's article is proposing $1.9 million budget. Neither of those two things, I think, while I laud the goals, I'm just not ready to support a $1.9 million expenditure if we don't have the details of what to do with the urine ironed out. So that's kind of where I am.
Okay. Okay. You want to?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Kristen, could you put up the first slide? Well, and then I'm going to say something about the schedule and then something about the budget. And so go to the next slide. I don't want to quibble about the number of months. I'm just guessing at that. But I'm pointing out that there's a sequence to this that I think is unavoidable. And the next slide, which we'll go to in a second, will be an explanation of the first bullet item. Items that will have to be done. Then we will have to write, discuss with town council and others, and agree on the contract with the participants. You can't sign the participants up until we know legally what we're agreeing with them about. Then we have to educate and sign up 50 volunteers, everyone knows that, install the systems, and then do the actual collection and monitoring. My point is that these are done in sequence. They're not done all at once. Next slide. That first group, we have to find the means of disposing of the pilot study urine. We have to I think it should involve obtaining signed letters of intent and acceptance by whoever is taking the urine with any necessary cost and revenue, both operating and capital, such as storage tanks, taking into account considerations of acceptance of untreated or treated urine, including possible contaminants and/or dilution, and any legal restrictions or permitting for storage, transport, and use. And then, as Steve has emphasized, and I totally agree, we have to know the Mass DEP requirements for the approval of UD as an IA, and adjust and discuss with water quality any implications for changes to experimental protocol. And my point on all this is, we're not just giving $1.9 million to some other group and say, have fun. This is, we're paying for it, we want to know what we're getting for our money. And then determine the availability and costs of acceptable toilets. That obviously has to be known before you sign a contract with the homeowners, or the homeowners are idiots. We are too. Perhaps determine more precise costs of monitoring, sample analysis, et cetera. And then the next slide. We have made contact with DEP, and we're going to have a Zoom meeting with them tomorrow. This is just another alternative way to slice up the money for you to think about. I just took the Mass Technical Center did a great job of coming up with a lot of costs. I just lumped them together. I'm not quibbling about the specifics. But this is not only going to benefit Falmouth, it's going to benefit all of Cape Cod and perhaps other parts of Massachusetts. So there's no reason the county could not supply the personnel in kind. The test center takes fees from commercial accounts, but the people that work there are on salary, so it's like a university or a professional consulting company. So I think it might, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, it could be that that makes it relatively easy for the county to say to them, yeah, you can do this and we won't charge the town because all the towns are going to benefit this. Why should Falmouth pay for it? The two line items for a DEP grant add up to of the order of $350K, which we might get from DEP. If you cut the subsidies to 50%, and you could have a sliding scale based on property value, then the participating towns would, in total, only have to put in 250,000, which is a long way from 1.9 million. There are other costs for project consultants and something for reporting, which are small, and I'm not sure what they mean. So I just made a note of it to be complete. And there's no reason not to have other towns participate. And that's all I wanted to say.
Come back to the original motion. Okay. I'm going to open it up to public comment. Anybody that would like to speak to the proposed motion?
Good evening. Matt Hanley from Thomas Landers Road. I've been following this issue and sewer issues in Falmouth for 13 to 15 years. I find it frustrating and obstructionist that the level of detail this board has went into to derail this urine diversion project. I'm not saying everyone is, but when it goes to a sewer project, concerned citizens from this town don't get this level of answers, we don't get answers when it comes to the town's $40 million, $50 million sewer project. So I hope when we have our open hearings.
Are you talking to the,
I'm talking to this. It's, the level of detail that this board has went into to throw hurdles and derail this urine diversion project. Some of these things have already been answered by the Green Center and by Kim Comart and the Falmouth Ponds Coalition, but they're continuously brought up.
Do you want to revise the motion of this board? What motion do you think this board should take?
I think the
to send
board
to the
should
selectmen?
support this, and the small details can be worked out, just like every other program in this town. There's always oversights, there's always setbacks in the time frame. To sit here and scrutinize this project to this level is insulting, and it sends mixed signals to the people of Falmouth. Does this
I'm trying
board
to follow you, Matt.
support this
That-
project, or
that
doesn't?
motion- That motion recommends, that's a motion proposed that this board recommend to the select board support of Article 22, which is the citizens petition.
That's great, perfect.
So that would be a positive motion by
Right.
this board to the selectmen to support Article 22.
Well, maybe I should have directed my response to Steve Layton. I appreciate you.
We'll come back to anything he said at some point here.
You
but-
don't have to
Yeah.
worry, I'm
No,
obviously
no,
outnumbered.
All right. So, no, I'm just saying I'm glad to see that this is going to move forward with the Water Qualities Management Committee support. Like everyone's saying here on the board, it just needs to be brief. It's, we still have a long ways to go. And, to add too much information, one of the things I heard last town meeting from the town meeting members is that there was too much information and they were overwhelmed. So the simpler we can keep this, the better, and that we'll work on all the details once this is approved by town meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me clarify, I'm not proposing that any of my
no,
stuff be
no,
incorporated.
No, we're not going to argue back and forth. You
just
gave
wanted
your
to
comment, he
make sure.
gets to give his comment, okay? Please.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Earl?
Yeah, Earl Barnhart, Green Center. I'm a little confused about the very end. We're going to do this project to look for DEP approval for its methods. That will be developed concurrently with during the pilot period for urine diversion. So are the watershed plans going to be made without considering putting this in because it's not done within 3 years and the plans have to be done within 5? Or will you put the urine diversion into the plans as a possible alternative that will be approved if DEP approves them?
No, Earl, just stay up there, so, because you might have a follow-up question. I put that last line in there specifically for sort of the way you're asking your question. the timing for preparing the watershed plans is such that some of them will be completed before we know of urine diversion is an approved IA, okay? They're going on concurrently. We do have an opportunity to update those plans on a regular basis, but we're not, I don't believe we're gonna stop, we can't stop doing the watershed plans because we're obligated to the DEP to do them. But if we don't, if we have to submit a couple of them on a certain timetable we've already built and notified everybody of, we do want to the extent we can get IA approval, include them as an alternative, okay? You know what I'm saying? We don't want to turn around, maybe I'm not saying this well. We don't want to create watershed plans that are so specific as to what you have to do in an areas designated for using IAs to exclude the likelihood. You know, I think as we're writing the watershed plans, we'll say, you know, we're in the midst of this, and to the extent that this gets approved, those will count.
So you're saying you might, in the watershed plan, say, we will use IAs in this area, not specify the IAs, and if after 5 years the urine diversion is approved, they become IAs, and then you could use them?
Yeah, and keep in mind that every 5 years, we have to give an update of whatever the plan is.
Thank you.
Okay. Additional public comments? The back row?
Good afternoon. I'm Maggie McGaugh from Waquoit, Little Lane in Waquoit. First of all, I strongly support your vote to approve this motion. I think that that will be a big step forward. I'm hoping that the working group of the WQMC that has already devoted a lot of hours to this pilot will sit down with Brian Baumgartel and Brian Horsley of Mass Tech, and with the DWP and the wastewater superintendent, and with petitioners to work through the details, you know, because it seems to me from the conversations I've heard of or been a party to, that there's a lot of information held by different people in the process, and that an actual sit-down around a conference table would advance everyone's understanding of the concerns that the different parties have. I understand that there's $40 million that has been set aside from retired debt for use for future sewer projects. And, you know, I'm a newcomer to local politics. I don't exactly understand the process of finance and funding in the town of Falmouth, but I would strongly urge the WQMC and the select board and so on to go back and work again with the finance board to potentially pull $2 million out of that 40 for funding this pilot. I think one of the big problems that I see is that as currently contemplated, this pilot is going to have to jump 2 hurdles and not just one. It's got to get approval from town meeting, and then it's got to go to a vote of the town in May.
I'm gonna cut you off, but I'll let you come back, okay?
Okay.
Because when this motion doesn't get into the financing
Okay, so
side.
yes, you're going to be
But
talking.
we're gonna continue to talk a little bit about urine diversion.
Okay.
It's a, you know, be patient, I'll let you come
Okay.
back up, all right?
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody else that wants to comment to the proposed motion?
Mark Finneran, Grand Ave. I've been participating, following at different levels for a good dozen years of this whole sewering. And if somebody had told me 3 years ago that we're going to get this kind of support for this proposal from this committee, I would have told them they were out of their mind. And I think this is a genuine step forward that can be applied all over town, and I just like to thank you people for taking the time and looking at this thing logically. And I can't see how it's not going to benefit everyone in the very near future. Thanks.
Okay? There's no additional comments. This motion that's been made and seconded. Any further comment?
The question. The current version of Article 22
Yes.
does not specify a funding amount, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, you have to have a number in there. If that number is approved, you can amend that number on town meeting floor if you want to. But if that number is approved, doesn't mean that has to all be spent. Okay? Hold on a second. Go ahead. So there is a number in there. There is a number in the petitioner's article.
Okay, which is 1.9 million?
Because the only thing we have so far is a proposal, which we have not accepted the proposal or negotiated the terms and conditions. But, so we're at the point of a petitioner's article asking to actually do a pilot program, which is equivalent to the article that that the wastewater department put together and put in. And again, it's a number because that's the number we have. We've not worked that number to a different number. We've not agreed on a lot of things that were in the proposal, but it's the best number we have so far as to what it could cost, not what it will cost, okay? You know, you go in for a sewer article, you have some estimate from an engineer or somebody of what it costs to do. Doesn't mean that's what it will cost to do it,
Right.
okay?
Mark?
Yeah, Mark, come on back up.
I may be incorrect, but I'm pretty sure that the article itself has to name a funding source.
Yeah,
Not,
yes, yes.
not loose, this seems kind of loosely.
Well, this is a recommendation
Oh, yeah,
of the Board of
okay,
Selectmen.
yeah, all right,
okay?
but they're, okay.
The petitioner's article has a funding source, and that funding source has been looked at by the town's finance person. I'll just answer this, because people have brought this up. You know this.
confused the
No,
two,
no,
I'm
that's
sorry.
right. You know this, Mark, but I'll walk you through as best I can. The town closes their books in June and July, and they determine how much they've drawn in revenue versus what they had to spend to get through their fiscal year. The difference is either a shortfall or extra money. The extra money gets referred to as free cash.
Free cash.
We go to fall town meeting typically with the departments and others making requests for how to spend that money. You know, and the finance people and other people will say, well, the DPW only gets one truck this year, or they get two trucks this year, or the fire department. And those numbers come in, but there's a caveat inside the finance scheme that the town's adopted, that none of those individual items can add to more than $1 million. Because if they add to more than $1 million, now it becomes a separate article. So oftentimes at fall town meeting, we see separate articles for bigger capital items.
Fine,
So at this time of the year, there's not a free cash pool sitting there. We're in the middle of a fiscal year as we come through April, okay? So the finance director has concluded that with an ask for $1.9 million, we're over the million, number one. There's no free cash necessarily sitting there, so therefore, the money will have to be raised from someplace, and it'll be a 2/3 override. That's where we're sitting.
Where we're sitting now. So it's going to be from an override.
That's
And
gonna,
back to the-
it's been, the finance department has said, it's over $1 million, there's no money sitting there. And to go back to the budgeting process, every department in town puts in a capital budget every year. But every
That's right.
department doesn't put a capital budget in for that 1 year. They put when I was in the water department, I had to have a 20-year plan for what the water department was gonna spend. And then 10 years of that went into the capital plan. So again, the finance folks are looking over a 10-year period, and every year that gets adjusted. So this hasn't had a spot
Yeah.
inside of
So
it yet.
the reality is, people should look back and look a little closer to what Steve has said, because if we can possibly pull this thing under $1 million, it's a no-brainer and a
I don't know where the,
potentially-
I'd have to go back to the finance person and say, if it's under $1 million, where is the money? Okay?
it would be, the chances would be better if it could be under $1 million. Well, you know, I mean, if you could make it broader, all right, I'm confusing things, sorry, but I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that the
Whoa,
program
whoa,
would cost less
whoa.
than, sorry.
He had his hand up first. Go ahead, Ed.
A couple of things. I think, to Mark's point, to try and, sneak down the dollars so that we might find some free cash, and this late in the fiscal year, it ends July 1st, there probably isn't a lot of free cash floating around. It's kind of for emergencies only. This is far from an emergency. I think it's important to get a sense from the wider community, town meeting members and Falmouth as a whole, are they with us or not? Are they committed to trying an innovative program and committing town resources of funds and personnel and volunteers like this committee and others to move this forward? If town meeting or the general electorate says no, I guess that means they're not committed. We're committed. You folks are committed. The people who have watched these meetings and written letters to the editor and articles are committed. Are there details in this 1.9 million proposal? Yep, it's a proposal. Brian Horsley's here from MassTech. He's been working on this. He continues to work on it. I myself have probably got 8 hours in this week on this whole thing, researching companies, grant opportunities, agencies worldwide that might participate, looking to set up some conferences with various groups that have tried things like this, are actively doing things like this on a smaller scale, and move it forward. But I think to get the community to commit or not commit is very important. Remembering that this is a live program that has a lot of details to work out. We've spent months talking about it, many hours, listened to a lot of comments from people all over the community. I think this is a good move by this committee. The committee hasn't voted yet, but hopefully it will support recommending that the select board gets behind this project, and then we'll see what the community says.
You're up.
Yeah, so I completely support the goals and motivations. I think the worst thing that could happen is we endorse this and then it fails, because that's a real setback, because we aren't quite 100% ready yet. And the one thing, and maybe there's an answer, Ed, that you can educate me on, or anyone else out there, that we learned at the last meeting was we don't know what to do with 15,000 gallons of urine a year. So if there's a solution to that, and I know some people say, oh yeah, we just ship it off Cape and apply it to fields, but I have been hearing that's not so easy to do. So, first, let me ask Ed, if you have researched that, can you satisfy me?
I'm going to touch upon, I'm going to touch upon this if I can, which is not part of this article or anything else at this point, but I'll touch upon it. So, the wastewater superintendent is currently out of state taking care of a family personal matter, so she's not around. But I have corresponded with her, asking if we can retain the consultant that we have to do an evaluation of what it would mean to take the urine that would be collected through the pilot program to our existing wastewater plant. If it would impact it or not, because nobody's looked at that. And I've asked to get a budget from them to do that. I think it's a relatively straightforward analysis, because they know how the plant works and what it does. And I would propose that where we've got 85,000 set to sort of, seed money, that we might need to use some of that to be able to confirm that we can take it to the wastewater plant and under what conditions, okay? But I don't have an answer in front of me today, but we're not sitting here doing nothing. I think in the meantime, the test center's also been taking a hard look at what they can do with the urine through the test program. The scale of a full program that would have not 50 people, but much bigger, during the 3 or 4 years that we'll be doing it, again, we will circle back to say, okay, what's the end goal or the end use of this once IA is approved, and that people start really wanting to do this? I don't think we have to solve that today, but we do have to have a place to put the urine we collect through the pilot program. So it's an open item. I think there's a couple different solutions. I know we'll get there. The question is just what the final solution is gonna be, we don't have today.
Can I respond briefly to his, since he asked me
He's been
directly? Okay.
wiggling his finger a little.
Let me hear from Ed.
So you're assuring me, I mean, you and Mark were mainly talking about where the money is coming from. I'm more concerned about where the money is going to. You're assuring me that if, for instance, we get a generous grant, we can in fact spend less, right? And that money can go to totally different things in the town. Is that correct or not?
I'm gonna try to answer your question. Can you pull up the petitioner's article?
That's what I want to see. Thank you.
Okay. I would have to go back and double check with the finance person or town council on how that's worded right now, as to how grant money would impact it. Usually there's a line that says that the amount can be, specifically if you know grants out there, you'll talk about it will be reduced, but I don't see that in there.
But to determine how the same will be raised might speak to that.
I would have to check it, but I think that is where the,
Well, I mean, Doug
recommendation-
Brown is here,
the
he's a
recommendation of the
smart
finan-
guy. I think that, having heard this, he's not going to support it if he sees a possibility of any part of that 1.9 million just being blown away and not being able to be reconstituted if there's a substitute for it.
okay, all right.
Hi, Doug Brown, Select Board. I don't think you ever have to always spend the money. So if other funding comes along, you just spend less and you turn back the unused portion. So I would not see that as a stumbling block.
Doug, what I've seen is particularly on things where you know there's a grant that you're gonna get, but you have to, like the SRF stuff, you have to appropriate all the money.
Well,
But then it talks about, and will be reduced by the amount of any loans or, anything received, so,
often that language is added to
yeah,
get town meeting members to be more encouraged to vote for it,
right,
because
so, yeah,
it's more positive if you have other sources that are involved.
yeah,
So by the time we get to town meeting, maybe that will be the case.
yeah, okay.
It might be a supplemental.
And a related thing, this is purely hypothetical. Suppose you can't solve one of the limiting factors, like where to put the urine. Can you then cancel the rest of the project?
Sure.
If we're not ready by you can get the funding in place.
You could delay it, at least indefinitely.
Get the funding in place, and if you haven't worked the bugs out, you don't agree to move forward. Then all the money gets turned back. But I
Okay.
think we could probably work it out by the time we get to being ready to go.
No, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't committed to something bad.
Okay. Okay, there's a motion that's been made and seconded for this board to recommend that the select board support Article 22 and all the other words there. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. All those that abstain,
I'm going to abstain because I just think, I'm concerned it's not quite ready for prime time.
okay.
I'm not opposed to the objectives.
So, the
But I can hear I can hear the criticisms.
the majority have voted in favor of the recommendation. Percent of you will just put that together and indicate that discussion in the vote, you don't have to list it and see that it gets to the town manager's office tomorrow to be included in the select board's agenda, and I guess we'll talk about it again Monday night, okay? I indicated, the lady in the back, I'm sorry, I should know your name by now, but Maggie, I had indicated I would let you come back to the financing question, but we sort of, it came back in and I talked a little bit to the financing. Do you think you need more information right now?
Well, I guess my one question is about, which I don't understand.
Okay, yeah. Is they recording it?
All right.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie.
So the one thing I would like clarification on that I don't personally understand is about retired debt. And my understanding is that there's $40 million for future sewer projects that, if approved by town meeting, will be funded out of retired debt. And I understand, but I don't know if it's true, that means that those projects would not need to be put to an override vote by the town.
Right. I'll walk you through this as quickly as I can, and
Okay.
help me out, Doug, if I mess this up, but the town sets a real estate tax rate based upon their obligations. And in any given year, there's an operating budget, and there's paying the amounts that we owe on outstanding debt. Okay? So again, back to that conversation I had before about 10-year, 20-year capital programs. As municipal financing is odd in the sense that a lot of times in Massachusetts, what happens is you pay a 20th of the capital amount you just borrowed every year. But you pay interest on the remaining balance, so it's not the same payment every year. Okay, so the first year you might have to pay $200,000, $100,000 for interest and $100,000 for capital. And the last year you're paying $105,000. Okay, so there's this. If you went over 20 years, there's this graph that's doing this. You stack up all of the different debt you have over time, and the idea is to keep that as level as possible with all those numbers you're adding up for police departments, schools, wastewater, water, roads, all the things that go to capital costs. People look out 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years with that thing, and they say, oh, and we've referred to this in the past as the window of opportunity. Oh, look, the town will either have to reduce the tax rate, because there's now $10 million of debt that is, quote, retiring, to use the phrase you're using, or they'll finance a project that fits into that gap, okay? So that's why when people look at certain sewer projects and the timetable for it, they talk about fitting inside the window of opportunity and fitting inside the retiring debt scheme.
And so that money, so if those $40 million are coming from retired debt, do they then need to be put to a separate standalone vote?
They need a 2/3 vote at town meeting,
At town meeting, but not a second vote?
because it's not a Proposition 2.5 override. You're not asking to raise the amount that you can levy on the taxes.
So the thrust of my question is whether the $2 million or whatever amount is agreed upon for this pilot could be funded from retired debt and not be required to go to a vote in May, not to have a second hurdle that it has to pass.
I could answer that.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So retired debt is just on paper where we see the debt dropping off, as Steve was explaining. But anything that the town wants to spend money on has to go to town meeting. Town meeting has to approve every expenditure. You know, we come up with the ideas, the select board says whether it's a good idea or not, and we endorse it. But even then, the select board doesn't spend the money. Town meeting appropriates all the money for any project, so there's no avoiding it.
But isn't there, for this project, aren't we being told that there will be a second vote that will have to pass town meeting and then it will have to be voted on by the town in May?
If we decide to go with the recommended debt exclusion, that's inviting the voters to vote on it and choose. And I think it's actually, in my opinion, a good idea, because I think it's going to be well supported, because in the end, it's going to save a lot of people a lot of money. So I think it will be very well supported. But it also is important to know that the town and the residents do support it, because if it's an idea that's going to need public support, that's a good gauge for it, so.
And you don't think town meeting, a strong affirmative vote at town meeting would be enough of a a vote of support of the pilot?
Maybe, but I think that to pull $2 million out of the budget quickly for a new project is difficult, so I think it's better to go to voters.
I mean, the last comment I'll make is, you know, projects like this typically go to fall town meeting, not spring town meeting, for exactly the fact that we're inside this operating year, okay? And being able to fit a project in along with all the other projects that have to be considered. The Finance Committee and others, they really work on that through June, July, August, and into September to be ready for November town meeting. So if, you know, if this article is coming to the fall town meeting, finding an ability to finance it without going down the 2.5 exclusion route would have a greater probability of getting through all the finance hurdles internally. But because it's coming to spring town meeting, there's not a lot of wiggle room right now in terms of saying the town's gonna spend $1 million, could spend up to $1.9 million, because you have to have a funding source when you vote that article. That's where we've gotten ourselves to.
And the timing is good because the election's in May, I think, right? So-
Yeah, you usually get one, boom, boom, 1, yeah. Okay. Okay. I want to move off of financing if I can for 1 second, and just provide the audience members and the board a brief update. I think the last meeting we mentioned that we had sent on to the DEP, both the proposal from the test center, as well as the working group's sort of bottom line recommendation, and ask for them to chime in on whether or not, if we did that, we would meet their expectations for getting IA approval. They have responded back. Ed has coordinated at this point what will be a Zoom call involving some members from the test center, Ed and a couple of other folks, to make sure that the proposal that we've got in front of us will pass. Well, if the proposal in front of us, we follow the proposal in front of us in terms of the technical elements, the data to be collected, the information to be provided, if that will be, if there's a strong expectation, if not a guarantee, that the DEP would then accept that and declare it to be an acceptable IA. We don't want to run this program and hand all this data into the DEP and have them say, oh, but you forgot to do this or forgot to do that. So we picked that up last time, said we would do it. People have been pushing on, as Ed said, he puts an hour or two in every day on this, and there's a call tomorrow, and we'll let you know at the next meeting how that call goes. So we'll get back to the details of the proposal and what we're going to ultimately agree to do or not do. We're still working on it.
The meeting tomorrow is specifically looking at a grant program that this may or may not qualify for.
Right.
We have the proposal and the.
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to make sure people didn't have a misconception that tomorrow's do or die with DEP on this. As I said earlier, this is an evolving program. A lot of details need to be worked out. Tomorrow's conference call is about a specific grant program that may or may not be part of this project. If it does, it can help our numbers. We are waiting for response from DEP on the proposal and the working group recommendation that was forwarded to them for review to see if this proposal meets their needs. We have not heard back from them, but once we do, we'll be scheduling a similar meeting with them to, okay, what do we have to do, or are we good to go? What more do we need, and how do we proceed and move forward expeditiously? So there is so many things going on in this thing that it can keep people busy.
Hilda, you had your hand up? Did you want to speak?
This is an unusual, Hilda Menge, Green Center. This is an unusual thought. The money that's going to be allocated for the sewering, which is, say, 40 million in town meeting, that construction is not going to happen tomorrow or next year or in 2 years. They're still doing the design for the next year or two. Couldn't we get part of that money for this pilot project, get it going for 2-3 years, get the results? By that time, they're ready for construction. And then if it's needed, if the pilot project looks good, then we might sewer less. or we can ask town meeting to add another $1 million or whatever it is for that construction that we took out. But it is all for wastewater, and it's all for nitrogen reduction. And they're not going to construct this sewer plant in 2 years. But they're going to ask the money for it. And they're always ahead because they always ask for the money that's available through retired debt. So they will always be there in time to get all the money they possibly can get, and then they'll use it whenever they need it in the future. And so I was wondering if there's any possibility that that money could be allocated for wastewater, which is the urine diversion.
I think you would, I don't know anything about town finances, but put yourself in the position of somebody doing this for a cause that you hated. You would be all over them for allocating money for something and then using it for something else.
It's not for something else, it's for nitrogen reduction. That is the ultimate goal.
You've made a suggestion and/or a request. I'm not sure how I would characterize
Just
it.
curious because it has never been done, because this is all new.
So I don't know the details of the financing on the sewer article or the ask that may or may not be made at town meeting this spring. But that article and any funding associated with that article is built into a timeline of when that money would be expended, okay? So you're right to point out that the design's not finished and construction's not starting right away. So what you're making a proposal is to use money that won't be spent, it's not expected to be spent until 3 years from now on something that is today, so that money might not be available today. It might only be available in 3 years from now on that whole debt drop-off scheme, okay? So to say you want to use that money might not be there to use. I mean, I have to go talk with the finance folks better to understand it, but I think the problem is, you know, that article is about money that's not to be spent in the next, starting this year or the next 3 years, but money to be spent at some point, and that's all tied up with the SRF funding and all that financing goes on. And so I think if you really dig into the way that's all financed out, even though the town appropriates what looks like a large number for sewers, at the end of the day, the town doesn't actually borrow or spend $40 million. But they have to have the ability to do that in order to award the construction contracts. And then they get SRF funding, 0% financing, and then they charge betterments, and the betterments then get all rolled over and transferred. So it's a little more complicated than that. There's $40 million that can be used for something else, okay?
Yep. Well, just a thought.
Yep.
And,
Good idea.
and a quick one, so the 50 homes, was it 100 people, takes 10 acres. I can guarantee you I can find 10 acres for putting all that urine, if that was your main concern. 10 acres. That's just to decide.
I think the whole concept of what we do with urine is a bigger conversation.
Yep.
A little further down the road. I mean, I'm very focused to kind of get a program out there that we can get to IA approvals so that homeowners have an option. Another option of what they're gonna have to do when we get these watershed plans together and start telling people within X feet of water bodies or within whatever, they shall within X period of time do something. You know, when we get to that shall, the more options that we can offer homeowners, I think the better. That's just where I'm at.
And would it be possible that we are part of this conversation about what is going to be in the proposal for the Mass DP to get approval? Because ultimately it was our idea to have this, and we would like to be in that process so that we know what is actually proposed for this scientific part of this proposal.
At this point here, I think whatever we have for proposals or wherever we're going next, we'll have to funnel through this board, so it'll be a public conversation as we keep marching forward.
So that won't be tomorrow, it will be not next week, but we'll hear about what it is in the
I
proposal.
could go back through the agendas for the last year. I don't think that we've had a meeting without urine diversion yet.
No, I'm just wondering, I really want to be part of the decision, how this project is going to be scientifically set up and tested.
I do believe at some point we are going to have an RFP or an RFQ, and it will be built around whatever we think we need to do, which we've been, working our way through and getting to. And then different entities will have an opportunity to submit their proposals as to how they intend to help us and get us there. Okay?
I have one last thing. On the sewer proposal, Article 20, there's no budget in there. But in ours, it's 1.9 million budget, and then we go through it in great detail. But the sewer never has anything like that. And it only comes in the explanation, and we still haven't heard what that is. And then when it comes to the ballot question, that money is never described in the ballot question. People don't know what they're voting for. So I would like to find out why it is that the sewer article doesn't have their number right in the article and only in the explanation.
There's nothing nefarious here. The citizens petition article had a specific number in it, okay? A lot of town articles might not have a specific number in it.
20, that's what I heard.
Huh?
It's number 20.
No, I'm just saying the articles that put forth by town folks might not have a specific number in it yet, but they then go to the finance committee and explain, what they need and everything, and then the article on the floor, the number gets into it on the floor, typically.
With an open-ended always at the end, and as much as they need, if that's not enough.
Yeah, I mean,
That's what it says in most of the articles. And I wish that would be here too.
yeah, I can't speak to the level, I mean, they've just started the design on the sewer, so I don't, whatever number they've got is in front of them may be an older number, and they may have their consultant working on a current number to take to the finance committee. I think, Doug, I don't know the time, but I thought you guys vote on citizens petitions and other articles, and then the finance committee sees it a week or so later?
I'm not sure the timeline.
Yeah, but it's not, it's in the next couple of weeks.
We're gonna listen to the presenters of the petition articles on Monday, and I guess we'll form our recommendations at that time. And the finance committee already has the budget. What was the question about the finance committee?
Well, her question is, the Article 20 doesn't have a dollar amount in it at this time, and why? And I,
It never does in the past either.
Well, because finance committee probably will put a recommendation after more deliberation.
It'll have one by town meeting floor.
Right.
But not in the article, it's always in the explanation.
Right.
Well, but it's there.
It's there.
It's always
but-
there.
But it's never in the article. And then when it comes to the ballot
That's
question, it's not there either.
It'll be there. It has to be there. And then I think the selectmen vote on all the articles on the 26th.
I think that's right.
Yeah, that's, I think.
Right.
Thank you so much for all your help.
okay. I'm gonna try to move, we've spent close to an hour, I'm gonna try to move on from where we're at with this. We've got a positive motion that will go out. I guess update on funding opportunities. Steve, you did some legwork?
Yes, I did call, and they were DEP was very enthusiastic about working with us on this. And, so we'll find out more, and we'll let you know.
Okay. That's good?
That's where we'll be tomorrow. There are other opportunities, maybe, one of the things I researched last year was the Cape Cod Commission Delta funds, and I think that's still out there. So there's things, we're not done looking at it. Steve, you've looked out at some federal possibilities that are possibilities. That's all they are, but, we'll continue to pursue those.
But I guess I'm gonna keep this as sort of a, like we have reports of members and staff photo minutes. I think I'm gonna keep this on the agenda for a while, so at every meeting, anybody knows, has heard a whisper of, a NOAA grant or anything like that. Okay.
Can I just clarify Steve Layton's, the DEP he spoke with was for the 319 grant, and that's the watershed planning grant. So that's the department that the call is with tomorrow. It has nothing to do with the Title V or whatever department Mary Beth Chubb is with. That's a completely separate entity.
319 is
So.
DBA.
All right. The next item on the agenda, over the last few meetings, we've had some conversations about Bourne's Pond. We've also had some conversations about Fiddler's Cove. And We talked about monitoring possibly Lawrence Pond because we're gonna build, do the inlet widening. I thought it would be a good opportunity for this committee to move back into, what do we monitor for water quality, and what might we want to monitor for water quality as we start reestablishing baselines on any time we do any work inside certain estuaries. And also to cover the fact that under the watershed permits, you're gonna have to gather water quality in each of the estuaries on a regular basis, and you're gonna have to report that annually and include it in your 5-year update. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to just revisit water quality monitoring, how it came about, what we're doing, and what we might want to consider to do as we march along. And Kristen is always great, and I make these sort of rambling remarks to her, and the next thing you know, she produces something that has more data in it than I can absorb, so we'll see how we do.
Kristen Rathjen, Science Wares. Steve just took my whole introduction, so we'll just move right along. So Massachusetts has state water quality standards that are supposed to be abided by for different surface waters. That's laid out in state law, but every 2 years or so, the state produces the Massachusetts Consolidated Assessment and Listing Methodology Guidance Manual. So it basically follows the same publication cycle as the Integrated List of Waters, so the 303D list. And in there, it updates the different criteria and helps guide you on what kind of specifications you're looking for, depending on what class of waters you're dealing with. So most of the text for all of these slides is lifted right from the manual so that there's no risk of interpretation from me. So this is a quick reference to answer all your water quality questions. The manual itself describes the data evaluation procedures used to assess water quality conditions of surface waters in the state. That's all surface waters. It's broken into the different categories: lakes, ponds, streams, rivers, estuaries. It also describes the process used to identify the causes and sources of impairment. Within the manual, it includes a brief summary of the state water quality standards, which are what the water quality goals are for each surface water body. It also has the methods for evaluating water quality data and information used by the DEP analyst to make the designated use attainment decisions. So every water body, it's called an assessment unit, so an individual pond, an individual estuary, they're all looked at independently. Each water body has specific designated uses. Maybe it's recreation, fish consumption, shellfish. So those are its designated uses. Based on what those uses are, there's parameters that need to be met for those uses to be attained. So that's what that means. I'm pretty sure that most, if not all, of Falmouth estuaries are considered Class SA waters. So that is the highest level of water quality. So Class SA waters are designated as excellent habitat for fish and other aquatic life. So basically to support all life cycles within there. So the designated uses, these are the specific categories that any surface water can have in any combination: support fish and wildlife, fish consumption, public water supply, shellfish harvesting, primary contact recreation, so that's where you're intentionally choosing to come in contact, that's swimming. Secondary contact, if you're out on the boat and you get sprayed, that's secondary contact. Aesthetics, agriculture, industrial. The sources of impairment, this is what comes from the Integrated List of Waters. So this is what, that list is what tells you what you need a TMDL for. So all of Falmouth estuaries have some combination of the sources of impairment that are listed here. They're not all the same. So you have estuarine bioassessments, fecal coliform, total nitrogen, dissolved oxygen, and or nutrient eutrophication biological indicators. Those are what the categories are for impairment. The criteria-based parameters to achieve water quality designations. So for something to be considered nitrogen impaired or dissolved oxygen impaired, the different parameters that are being looked at in the data. These are all of them. Dissolved oxygen, temperature, pH, solids, color, turbidity, taste, odor, oil and grease. So when the state looks at whether a water body should be put on the impaired list, they want all of the data from all of these categories they can. This is the summary table from the CALM manual. I clipped it for portions specific to estuaries. We're not going through this in detail. But for biological monitoring information, they have the general criteria laid out for macroinvertebrates. So it's telling you how a water body gets on as classified as being impaired. If it's meeting, stuff in the red column. If the use is supported, we're over here. These are the parameters. These right here, the goal, this is the goal for improving and restoring estuary health. So primary producer data, chlorophyll for estuaries. Chlorophyll has to be less than or equal to 5 micrograms per liter. That's where you can say your estuary is healthy for that parameter. Eelgrass we'll talk about a little more in detail because that's the benchmark for most of our estuaries.
So do you have to meet all of them, or is it a score kind of thing?
Patience, my friend, patience. There's toxicology data, the physiochemical data, so DO, pH, temperature. More physiochemical sediment. Eelgrass. So, very wordy, but again, this is coming directly from the manual. How the state is saying that they're assessing eelgrass is that they are looking at the first eelgrass mapping project data from 1995, and they are comparing the most recent data set. So this manual was 2022, so they're saying the most recent for that was 2015 to 2017. There is a new data set that came out. It's the 2019 to 2023 data set. But what they're doing is they're comparing the 95 data to the most recent. If there is minimal loss, so less than 10% loss from the 1995 data, it's considered stable. If it's a greater than 10% loss, that's substantial decline. Aquatic life use is not supported. It's considered impaired. In that table, it talks about the eelgrass habitat. So in an assessment unit, so in whatever specific water body, if it's increasing, fairly stable, but it also has the combination of the chlorophyll and little to no macroalgae accumulations. So specifically within eelgrass, it's already got 2 other parameters tied in with it. The data collection consideration and criteria. So this is, again, straight from the manual. It specifically calls out embayments in southeastern Massachusetts and the MEP project. What it's saying is that basically the MEP did such an in-depth evaluation that they have several response variables. So these are the key variables from the MEP. Since the project's intended to develop site-specific nutrient thresholds, so each embayment has its own, the overall analysis of habitat health are utilized to make the aquatic life use attainment decisions. The way I interpret that is that these parameters in blue, those are the key ones for the estuary because that's the key ones from the MEP project. When the state is considering data, so if you want to either have something listed on the integrated water list or get delisted to be reclassified as restored, there are certain data quality parameters that have to be met. All of the data have to be collected under a quality assurance project plan, so under a QAP. So you can't just have citizen scientists going out and collecting data and saying, these are my observation. All of the analyses have to be done by a state-certified laboratory, and they have to show demonstrated attention to QA and QC within the data. The state will also prioritize data that is less than 5 years old. So they want the most recent 5 years of data to make their decisions. In Falmouth, With the exception of West Falmouth, because of the discharge, there's mandates for monitoring over there. The majority of the water quality monitoring has been voluntary. So for the estuaries that are designated as nitrogen-sensitive areas, they've either been monitored by Pond Watch, which is run through SMAST, Buzzards Bay Coalition, there's some monitoring by the Center for Coastal Studies, and there's also monitoring within Wacoit by Webner. Falmouth actually funds the Pond Watch for the South Coast estuaries, and that's through the wastewater department operating budget. They've funded that contract for many years. Buzzards Bay Coalition monitors the Buzzards Bay estuaries, and they do that as part of their own program. Center for Coastal Studies, I am not really familiar with what their monitoring program entails, but they generally do the south-facing estuaries, and it's usually the southernmost station within those. And Wacoit has their long-term monitoring program, their swamp program, at set stations within there. All four of those groups collect their data under QAPS. The Pond Watch data, so this is the data that the town funds for West Falmouth, Little Pond, Bournes Pond, Green Pond, Great Pond, and Oyster Pond. All of these parameters are what comes when SMAS turns over our data for the year. All of these are in the spreadsheet, easily accessible. For Buzzards Bay Coalition, any of the parameters in purple is what comes from their data sheets. They also include total phosphorus, dissolved organic carbon, and pH. So looking at just the list of the estuaries and who's doing what. So you can see there's some duplication of coverage for West Falmouth. Again, Center for Coastal Studies does some stations. And then over in Wacoit Bay, part of it is covered by Pond Watch, and that's under a contract with Mashpee. Some of it's covered under Webner, and I believe there's also a contract for a portion of it with the tribe. But I don't know where all of those stations are related to each other. Within the watershed permit regulations, the specifications that it talks about as far as water quality monitoring, it talks about it in the application that the application has to include either a watershed or sub-watershed scale monitoring plan that defines the goals of the monitoring plan, the parameters, the methods, sampling frequency, location, time, duration, and a QAP. And the only other time those regulations discuss monitoring or any specifics is in the duty to monitor, and that's pretty much to ensure that the records of who sampled, when, where, who did the analyses, when, where, to make sure all of the proper handling procedures are met. Those are the only specifications given under the watershed plans. So that comes back to what other kinds of considerations should be looked at for the current monitoring, any changes to the current monitoring under watershed plans, but also in relation to large-scale implementation projects. So in 2021, the committee recommended to have an updated baseline evaluation of Little Pond. That was ahead of the potential effects of the sewering project, to be able to identify what the sewering project actually accomplished when you go to claim credit from the state. So, Bournes Pond, we found out last meeting that final permit has come through and that construction hopefully will begin fall of this year. Question is, should there be a new baseline evaluation conducted? Should there be a monitoring program to help isolate what the actual nitrogen reduction impact of that inlet widening is for documentation for the state? Again, with Great Pond, TASA Phase 1 is moving forward. Should there be a baseline evaluation that's conducted prior? And then with the general monitoring, looking at what kind of parameters are being collected now, should there be any modifications that, based on what the state is putting out, we need to include, or is there too much monitoring being done? And then I just included where you can get those two documents from in case you want material to help you fall asleep at night.
Oh, come on.
They're pretty thick.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. A lot of information to absorb, I'm sure. Ken, though, I'm going to go to you first, because I think you do some of this.
Yeah, well, you know, we've been studying Little Pond, as you know, and the first issue was to look at the groundwater inputs and how they've changed. So that's probably our longest and most comprehensive data set in response to the sewering, and that has shown declines in nutrient concentration. The more challenging question is, how does the ecosystem respond? We're about to start a more comprehensive study of that, looking at what the exchanges between Little Pond and Vineyard Sound, and many of the same types of measurements that are being made, you know, with the current monitoring, in terms of chlorophyll concentrations and oxygen. Hopefully we'll have maybe a little more comprehensive data set than what they're doing. So, but conducting this work, you know, is pretty intensive, requires a lot of person power and a lot of lab facilities, and so it's expensive to do it comprehensively everywhere. I mean, that's my, I don't know if that, you know, another big issue for Little Pond that we're going to start looking at is regeneration of nutrients from the sediments, which is not explicitly mentioned here.
Right.
Obviously, if you have been adding nutrients for a long time to a system, you accumulate a lot of organic matter in the bottom, and it starts to decompose. It might take some time for that nitrogen to wash out of the system. So that's sort of something we want to get some handle on.
So I'll frame a couple of questions and looking again for your initial input back. So we started this by, you know, you talk about, you know, measuring flushing and stuff, Steve, which, so the first and foremost question is it reasonable and/or prudent for us to reestablish the baseline as we work inside each one of these estuaries?
I believe it is.
Okay.
Good to do, and in particular with the inlet widening, I mean, again, that's a big effort, but knowing how that affects the circulation of that system would be very useful.
So, I mean, part of this is to say things that we should be doing to work our way to how do we budget going forward as we're developing plans, or, you know, do we go back to the funding for the Bourne Pond Inlet and say a portion of that money needs to be used for this baseline, because you got to be able to measure it. And similarly, if we're going to the Tassa area, do we establish it? So that's kind of the first
Right, I mean,
overview
the
question.
thing that appealed to me about Little Pond, it's a very comparatively tractable system because it has such a, you know, defined outlet. So, you know, we can pretty easily budget what goes in and comes out compared to most of the other systems. But they all do have, you know, fairly restricted inlets.
So when you put up the list of things that you should be doing, I guess one of the questions to you, you're talking doing stuff at Little Pond that maybe goes beyond the list of things that they tell you to measure.
A little bit, yeah.
Should we be considering, again, I'm back to,
Well, there are, I mean, Jordan can also speak to this. Been doing it in McQuaid Bay comprehensively. They've been measuring with, you know, instruments that are capable of continuously recording oxygen at multiple locations. And that's a great indicator of, you know, how is the metabolism of the pond overall being affected by the inputs of nutrients. I think McQuaid is probably the best example. And there's been data published that has shown what the trends have been over the years, but it's a long-term study. You have, what, 20-plus years of data?
Yeah, more like 25 or so now, yeah.
And so you don't necessarily see, you know, from year to year, there's variation. So looking at a short data, you know, couple of years is probably not sufficient.
So I guess my question here is, are we talking about eliminating or expanding the work that Pond Watch is doing? Because it sounds to me like we're already monitoring these annually, so that's good. So we have that
Right.
data going forward. I'm not sure what we're trying to get out of this discussion. We should absolutely keep the Pond Watch monitoring going. I think the frequency and the placement of those stations is pretty much based on or mirrors the MEP, efforts that were done. So they can be compared against what was done before. We should have a pretty updated baseline because it's been happening every year. I think that maybe one of the questions is, should we be reestablishing baselines on eelgrass for these sites, and how often should we be monitoring eelgrass? And I think, that's probably something we could talk about. It sounds like DEP has done a fairly recent, evaluation of the eelgrass in some of these estuaries. Macroalgae, I think, is a harder one to really get good data on if you're looking at it through aerial photos like DEP does. There's a lot of data out there. There's lots of data out there. And I think what we should be thinking about is maintaining our programs so that we continue supporting, data collection. But we might want to expand into some more eelgrass monitoring down the road is kind of what I
To answer
think.
your sort of very first question, can you scroll to the thing where the watershed permits have this thing that say you will, okay. So, again, we kind of jump into finished answers sometimes when I'm trying to keep everybody guiding towards what do we want to put into the ultimate RFP or RFQ for whoever we retain to do the watershed plans? What do we want them to look at and/or do? That's a little bit vague, that the application must include this. So part of this getting in front of you, knowing that some of you know way more about this than I can forget, let alone learn, is, as we start putting together what we want to do or things that we might want to do before the watershed plans are in place, so we're in good shape. So your comment that, maybe we should be mapping eelgrass, it doesn't specifically say that, but maybe as we put together a plan, we're going to say what we want to do is, when we do the first baseline, is map the eelgrass again.
This slide tells you absolutely nothing, right? I mean, the obvious loophole, I could say, I'm going to measure the temperature very carefully with a NIST-approved thermometer once every 5 years.
You won't
And
get
I'm
your
very clear
quack
that's all
approved.
I'm going to do, and I'm going to have all the quality, right? It doesn't tell you what to measure.
But they won't.
They won't accept that.
They won't approve the plan,
But
okay?
it's not because of this slide.
Well, it
It's
could be
the much
several
more
things.
They
complicated
won't
slides
approve
that
your
Kristen
quack.
showed.
Could be many more other things, so, but we have to develop,
Well, they might
No,
approve
they'll
it if it's
approve
an
the quack,
NIST.
because I'm using a good thermometer and everything. But it's your other more complicated slides that put me to sleep, but these other experts here probably understand.
Right, and that's
That tell you what
why,
you actually have to measure.
that's why they were included, because that's what's in the state water quality standards. So
Right, so
that's
there's a
what
list
we
of
should be
required
using
stuff.
as the
And if you go back-
guide,
if- if-
Right.
what to include in here.
Yeah,
If you go back to the Pleasant Bay, the one plan that's been approved, I mean, if you start diving in there, they've got all this stuff about monitoring, a lot of stuff about monitoring.
So take chlorophyll, for example, which is often used as a sort of integrated parameter, right? Water column chlorophyll. But it can be quite variable from time to time because you get a bloom and then you get a crash and then you get another bloom. You get a big flushing event. So the issue I always have with the way things are currently being measured is we probably don't have a high enough frequency of measurement. But to get the high frequency of measurement is extremely costly.
And so I don't have an understanding of what extremely, I mean, does it say it's cost
Well,
$1
you
million,
need-
does it cost $1 million for each estuary?
No. Well, we'd love to.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, we can spend.
challenge accepted.
But you know, you need more than, you need a team of people to go out and make routine measurements, and you need instrumentation. So if you deploy a sonde like the ones that they're using in Wacoit, each one of those is about $15,000, but they have to be taken out every couple of weeks and calibrated. So you need a person responsible for that. They generate huge amounts of data because they're sampling every 15 minutes or so. So now you need someone to analyze and manipulate all that data. So it rapidly, each person you hire, you're talking 40, 50, 60,000 a year to pay them, plus fringe, plus overhead. So, if you have a team of 5 people, you're up to 300,000-400,000 a year.
Okay. But, this is exactly the conversation I want to get going, because at some point, we're gonna need to start, back to that 10, 20-year plan or operating budgets, we're gonna need to start, raising everybody's understanding that, as we've said from the get-go, there's things in the watershed plan that are gonna cost money, okay? And, if we wanna try to say, oh, we could maybe get a plan through and, it's only $150,000 a year, but it doesn't tell us anything at the end. We're just spending $150 to fill out something, to comply with some requirement from the state. I've been pitching that we want to tell people what it's going to cost to know what's going on, make good decisions, and improve the health of the estuaries. So,
certainly, another aspect of it is if such a plan were ever to be floated, you want to have a competitive, a competition
yeah.
to solicit proposals to do it, and not just assume it's going to go, to SMAST or any other particular institution.
Right. First thing we do is we hire somebody to.
John's looking like.
So, you've got to pick parameters. Something like chlorophyll is temporally very variable. Something like eelgrass integrates over long periods of time. And so knowing the eelgrass areas is giving you a much longer time frame than looking at oxygen on a daily basis or chlorophyll. So I think picking the parameters that will integrate over, and this is why we've historically said eelgrass restoration is probably as good an indicator of pond health as anything that we've had. And we've sort of, I think the whole monitoring program that was done by UMass basically was based on eelgrass health.
Well, their criteria is total nitrogen, right, which is particulate and dissolved at various stations. I mean, that was the criteria they established. The issue, a couple problems that I see with eelgrass. One is you could have a reduction in nutrients to your system and you might not get the eelgrass back, at least not right away.
Right.
So, it's a very long time frame to see the effects. What we went with to start with in Little Pond was, let's just look at nitrogen in the groundwater coming in. If the sewering's been effective, we should see a decline in the nitrogen. It wasn't expensive. We put in half a dozen monitoring wells. Each one has 3 or 4 depths. We only have to sample them a couple times a year, and we get the picture of nutrients are going down in this system. That's all we can do anyway in terms of trying to improve water quality is reduce nutrient inputs. The rest of it has to happen naturally. And there isn't too much that, in terms of our ability to control the ecology of the systems, that can be done. Inlet widening certainly is one thing, increasing flushing, but
Yeah, I don't know if this is helpful.
Steve's had his
Sorry,
hand up
go ahead.
quite a bit, so I just want to let him jump in.
There are
Then
answers,
back to you.
there are answers to your question, Steve, on 2 different timescales. They can be divided into 2 groups as far as how soon you need the answer to your question. for instance, the stuff that goes into the watershed plans, you've got a couple of years, maybe. Or, I mean, the business about the flushing change that might be created by the inlet widening has to be done before they widen the inlet, if you want that answer. I'm just saying that's one way of looking at it.
I'm listening to you, I'm not.
And so we could have a separate discussion about whether it's important to know how much the flushing has changed. I mean, the nice thing about that is it's a straightforward engineering measurement. The people at UMass Dartmouth and John Ramsey and all those people know how to do that. And there's no biology involved. It's just flow, and it should come out exactly the way John Ramsey designed it. And that might or might not be useful in getting credit from DEP for all the 40 million or whatever that's going into that inlet widening. It seems hard to believe that it wouldn't be a tiny amount compared to the 40 million.
So let me backtrack, because you're focused on the Bourne Pond one. Maybe what I'm.
It's very different than the other
No,
questions.
it might not be different. Part of it is, do we think that every time, that there should be a revisit to the baseline monitoring? Now, we might turn around and say, yes, that we want to do that. The fact that we've got a project going forward before we have the plan, we just have to find a way to do it, okay? And that'll be the Bourne Pond sort of example, or maybe the Tassa area. But that as we get somebody to start preparing the plan, we're saying, we believe there's a lot of benefit and need for revisiting the baseline, and that should be in the plan, that, within X time period of any major thing, the baseline will be reestablished, okay? Just so you know, we have solicited and have got back a proposal to do baseline monitoring at Bourne's Pond, but since Amy's not here tonight, I don't want to go any further than saying we've gone out to get some pricing on doing that. And some of that led me to turn to Kristen and saying, I think the baseline monitoring is not just a Bourne's Pond thing or the whatever, it's a bigger conversation. So let's do it on a bigger basis and talk about it, okay?
And let me say one other quick thing. Also, on a lot of these, the question can be looked at, well, does anyone think we're doing something wrong right now in any of these areas? Are we not doing enough? What could we do more, and what would the gain be? And also, on any given data sampling stream, what's the frequency been before, and would one right now make a difference compared to the data points you already have and the ones you expect to get after you make some intervention? If it doesn't, if when you look at the graph and the proposed graph, this one extra point, it just intuitively makes no difference, then don't buy it. If there's a gaping gap there, then you probably should measure at that time.
Ed?
To the questions that were on one of the screens, seeing that we had two questions raised about doing some baseline sampling at Bourne's Pond before the inlet's widened, and at Great Pond before Tasca goes through. I believe I heard Jordan say, we've got a ton of data for those already, so the baselines are there, correct? So we don't need to check it again.
Well, so we have water quality data that's being collected at
Right.
a number of sites at each of these ponds, but like for Little Pond, we did the in-fauna assessment, we did that baseline again, and also eelgrass. I think it would be wise to look at what DEP has before we go ahead and contract someone to do eelgrass again, but I think it could be helpful to look at the in-fauna again. So yes, there's data out there for the surface waters, but there's not so much baseline for some of those harder to sample things like eelgrass.
Like eelgrass. But the key criteria that DEP's looking at and throwing TMDLs at us is nitrogen. Bing. If we have good years of data baseline type nitrogen for Bourne's Pond, well, I guess we know what we get for a baseline, with enough long-term so that any noise and spikes in there are leveled out. So then we widen the inlet this fall. Pretty quick, when the next monitor samples are taken, we should start to see a change if inlet widening is indeed effective.
So for the inlet widening, I agree with you. I think what we don't have, which, we were just talking about, is groundwater. I think also setting up some wells and looking at groundwater for the TASA section in particular will be important, because you won't see changes to your nitrogen very quickly in
Right.
those
Right,
areas.
but the concern was for Bourne's Pond, the inlet widening. Task is gonna come. I don't know, Ken, did we have data for Little Pond prior to the sewering? Or
We
did we
started-
start doing data after sewering was already
We
in?
had some prior to the sewering, and we started doing it in 2015 before the sewer was
Okay.
constructed, in anticipation of the sewer being constructed. It was actually surprising to me, how rapidly the nitrogen levels seemed to have declined, which made me a little worried about the data. Did we get it right? But the way I look at it, there's sort of two pieces to this puzzle. One is, and this is the only one that we actually are affecting with all our strategies of IAs, sewering, urine diversion, whatever we do, is the input. And we can quantify that if we look at the shore. The other possible way we've quantified it, and we've tried this in West Falmouth, is looking at what flows out of the system during times of the year when there's not a lot of biological activity. So you can actually plot salinity versus nutrient level, and then sort of work backwards to fresh water and say, okay, the input was X, Y, or Z. In the case of Little Pond, we found reasonably good agreement doing both those strategies between what the wells told us and what that says. But that's just telling you the external input. It's not telling you the internal recycling, which is the other big potential source of nutrients that could stimulate productivity in the system, perhaps inhibit eelgrass reestablishment, so forth. And then there's, how does the ecosystem itself respond? How do we get eelgrass back? Recruitment in, that's sort of a random thing. People have looked at this, they've done meta-analyses in the literature. I read one paper, 87 systems. How long did it take for them to respond to nutrient abatement? I think the average they gave was 15 years. That doesn't mean it's going to take 15 years in Little Pond or in Great Pond, but it takes a while to move the needle once you've perturbed the system.
So, correct me when I get wrong here, but I think Megansett, we're making nitrogen at the Sentinel Station, right? So, every case is slightly different. So, so if you come back to one of the very early slides.
Jordan has the same question. What do you mean you're making
Are we
nitrogen?
making
You
nitrogen?
mean making?
To increase the concentration is being met.
You mean meeting.
We're not making nitrogen.
I thought we had a little
We're
factory
meeting
up there.
the threshold concentration at
So
the
this is,
Sentinel.
this is
Talking
the,
about Quissit?
He said Megansett, but Quissit is as well.
I'm using Megansett because
Okay.
there's some other issues in Megansett. So what we have is a situation where this TMDL nitrogen number is a bookkeeping exercise. And the moment where you say, we're reaching the nitrogen level at the Sentinel Station, doesn't allow you to turn around and declare it to be an SA water as it's supposed to be. It then puts you in the position of being able to prove that all the other things that you have to have for an SA water are now there. So coming back to it might take 15 years, again, back to the whole, what's the monitoring plan? What's the requirement gonna be? Are we gonna be doing this for 50 years, 20 years, 1,000 years? it's, the nitrogen number is not in and of itself gonna tell us that we're now at an SA water.
Well, if you have to satisfy the state, then I think you need to look at what their parameters are.
Yeah, we may wanna turn around and say, okay, this is what we wanna measure in certain estuaries for a certain point, but then as we do different ththings in different estuaries, we wanna change what we monitor. And then if and when we achieve the nitrogen value, we go into, an, as you say, the bigger picture, what's happening in the biological system at that point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Doug, why don't you go to the microphone, just so we pick you up, because you have such a good baritone.
Hey, Doug Brown, Select Board. So also, you should think about maybe getting some extra data, because the SMAS program only uses 4 Sundays in the summertime.
That's my point.
You know, Falmouth Water Stewards, we test year-round, and we found a lot more diverse results and a lot more information. And also, it's volunteers, so the data might not be
But
perfect.
there are instruments that you can deploy that will get you virtually continuous measurements of many of these parameters, including chlorophyll. You
Yeah.
need to calibrate, but.
More frequent monitoring is more accurate
And there,
data.
you know, there's an initial outlay of 15 or 20,000. If you put 2 of them in, 30,000 per system. And then someone to go around and collect all that information. That's where the big, you know, and maintain it, so. The NERS have been doing this everywhere.
I guess I have a couple comments, if I'm allowed to speak. Seems like I am. So you said 4 Sundays, and I just wanted to clarify that. So SMAS monitors every other week from June through the end of September. So I think that's 4 months, every other week. But I'm not sure what you meant by 4 Sundays.
Well, I did it for 17 years, and it was only 4 times in my bay, Great Bay.
Okay.
So maybe there's other weeks that they do
Yeah,
it.
maybe you were like on the
That's 'cause there's-
alternate week or something like
there's
that.
like 89 estuaries, so they can't do them all
Yeah.
at the same time.
But I just wanted to clarify that in terms of their, you know, their monitoring plan. I think they do every other week, June through September.
Somewhere.
And then I guess what I feel like where we're drilling down into here is maybe the committee should come up with some, and this is like actually something I feel like I could do, present some sort of proposal for monitoring these systems. And, you know, I could come up with a draft and send it to Ken, and then he could, you know, review and
It's a big,
we
you know,
could
it's a
present
big
it.
discussion. What you're
Yeah.
really talking about is sort of cutting-edge estuarine science. How do you do it?
Jordan just elected herself head
But-
of a
but-
new
but-
work.
I did.
I'm glad that you stepped up, because I was going to try to see if I could convince the two of you. I don't think you have to come up with what I would call a hard and fast proposal, but again, we could start building an outline saying, you know, we're not, this is me, but, you know, I don't believe the mandate of this committee is to achieve the nitrogen level at the Sentinel Station. I believe the mandate of this committee is to restore the estuaries and to be able to, you know, report on the health of these estuaries and how we're making progress. So an outline of what we should be doing to achieve that can then help to inform the plans that we start to put together. And if, you know, I don't know whether you buy 5 or 6 of these $15,000 devices, and you move them between estuaries, and you say, because we're gonna be doing work here over this 5-year period, we're gonna concentrate on getting better data here, or whether we want, I don't know that. So if, you know, when you feel like you start to get someplace, we've got time, we're not gonna go to town meeting to get money to hire anybody to do watershed plans for a little bit of time, probably the fall or whatever. We have time to, you know, work on this, bring it back in and talk more about monitoring. But this is you know, I looked at this, I said, this is not just there's not a checklist someplace that the state's given
No,
us.
I
It's-
appreciate that. I
and
think that's
Maganza seems
a good way
like
to look at it.
entirely different from McCoy in terms of where it's at and what's happening in it and what we know and how much data we might or might not have in any one estuary and how we plug in and get more. And I'll stop. On the eelgrass, I don't think, just listening to people talk about it, I don't think you have to measure that every year. But if we have to report every 5 years and we got a rolling series of plans coming in, maybe we contract with Hui and get their remote machine that we used, and every 5 years, look at the eelgrass.
Yeah.
Matt Hanley, Thomas Landers Road. I
Still.
actually, when I'm not here, I actually work on water quality outside of Falmouth and all of Cape Cod and the islands. I'm on the board of director of Surfrider Foundation. We're an international nonprofit that is very concerned about water quality for recreation. We're actually starting up a blue water task force here on Cape Cod. We're already talking to Buzzards Bay Coalition. We're going to be kind of mirroring their sampling and using their guidance so we can work together because, like everyone said here on the board, water monitoring is expensive, and to get the volunteers, and you want to get a greater variation of sampling. So we're going to work with Buzzards Bay Coalition. Chris Neal I've already talked to him a little bit about water monitoring on Cape Cod and the islands. But, I think they should be involved in the conversation because they're actually doing some of the monitoring for Falmouth for some of our estuaries in Buzzards Bay. And so, I know Surfrider loves partnering with municipalities and organizations and stuff like that. And if all of us can work together and do sampling, and all our sampling, follows the same parameter, and then we can set up a schedule for all these organizations, so we're getting a larger variety of sampling over more points, so we're getting more data points at more locations. I think that would be ideal. If Jordan, if you want to contact me, I can give you my contact information after the meeting. We can get, if you want to come to a Surfrider Foundation meeting, we're right here in Falmouth. We hold a lot of our meetings in Falmouth, but we do represent the Cape and the islands. So it's Surfrider Foundation, Cape and Islands. And so this is important to Surfrider. We're international, so we're doing work in the United States and outside the United States.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll circle with you after the meeting.
Okay.
I like to get out of here by 6:30, so I think this is a good discussion. Unless there's something hot with any of the board members or anybody that's still in the audience on this, we'll move on to the next item. Reports of members and staff. Anybody got anything to report?
The urine diversion guy, I guess is me, we talked about that quite a bit earlier, but just to update the entire board, I had a meeting on the 26th at the Mashpee Town Hall with a group of citizens and town officials, and it was very interesting. It was kind of a last-minute deal. I got a call on a Tuesday, could I be there Friday, and I thought it was a regular weekly session of town officials. Turned out it was specifically a meeting that they wanted to have to talk about the Falmouth urine diversion program. And we had the town manager of Mashpee, the director of natural resources, the Board of Health agent, selectmen, people. We also had a couple of people, including a Board of Health member from Sandwich, people from the Peters Pond Association, Mashpee Wakeby Pond Group, and they had a bunch of questions about our proposal. It was great to see the enthusiasm from other communities about, hey, we've heard about it, we want to be part of this. They definitely want to be part of it. They have people that want to participate. One of the people already had participated in the Green Centers project, just using the cubies for a couple of months. She produced a really nice 5-minute video that shows her and her husband how they actually use this in their, not
X-rated.
That's right.
not discharging, but how it sits in their bathroom and how they use it. And people that are interested, it's a great tutorial on the functionality of a portable system. But they did have topics, concerns about, what are things like forgivable loans, things that Falmouth learned 10 years ago in our original program were a good way to go. I went over the history of this project, how it started and what we've been doing and where we're at, and how They had a lot of questions about, well, full participants that are going to use 100% urine diversion versus maybe participants giving us portable device data, what we're going to call the ancillary data, if we can get the funding to do that also is in this thing. And they had questions about the contaminants, and well, what about the chemo residues? What about, PFAS in the urine, and all of these things. And all I want to say is there's a lot of people worldwide that are working on this. I've been in contact with some of them, and probably going to set up some discussion group with MassTech and some of these other organizations that are working on the processing of the urine, the reuse of it, interfacing with farmers, transporting it in bulk. Big issues. There's people that want to work with us, and it's great to see this, because as we look for funding, having regionalization as part of it will go a long way to convince the grant people that, hey, this is for real, and it's not just Falmouth and a couple of folks, it's a region, so.
Thank you. Quick update on the outfall effort. The town has contracted with GHD on the outfall. We did have a week or so ago initial kind of kickoff meeting. The next meeting will be with GHD and GZA, who will be doing the marine borings, and in the process of setting up a call with CZM to make sure that we get permission to do the marine borings next fall. More to come on that.
And was the GHD part of it, the pathway to the heights that we talked about?
Yeah, they're gonna pick that, that'll get
Good,
picked up, but,
okay.
yeah, we talked about, looking at a couple different alignments and
Yeah.
then putting on a plan someplace in the town's records. I'm gonna put you on the spot, Tom. I know that you've been tracking stuff with the shellfish.
Yes,
Hoping to get you to put you on the agenda in a future meeting, but
yes,
we're getting reports in from the growers and everything.
right, that's the plan, and actually show you some hard figures as to how much nitrogen has at least been taken out.
But my understanding, it was a good year for them.
Yes, it was a very good year.
Okay.
I don't have all the details,
Yeah,
but I have a bunch of them.
Look forward to hearing more about that. Any other reports from committee members on any particular items? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to vote minutes of the prior meeting. As usual, Kristen did an excellent job of taking rambling discussions and turning them into cognitive sentences and thoughts, and Tom did his usual excellent job of improving.
Touch-up.
Improving the.
It's only touch-up.
Improving the works of Shakespeare and turning them into like modern English.
I pulled a few of the dents out, and the ones I couldn't, I covered with Bondo.
Anybody else have any concerns or comments on the minutes as distributed? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved. Approve the
Second.
minutes.
Okay, seconded. All those, any discussion, no further discussion, all those in favor of accepting the minutes?
Aye.
Aye, terrific.
Yep.
Our next meeting is going to be, is going to skip the vacation week, is that correct?
Yes, please.
Okay, did everybody pick up that little change along the way? Okay,
So the next meeting is?
The 28th.
28th. Same bat time, same bat channel, right?
Same slate of candidates.
All right, there's no further business or comments at this present time. I'd accept the motion to adjourn.
Sample on.
Not hearing a motion.
So moved, adjourned.
All right.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.